Today, we're talking about 3 things to do immediately when you get hired as a youth pastor at a new church.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Ministry Coach Podcast, where we bring you weekly tips and tactics to help you fast track the growth and health of your youth ministry. My name is Jeff Lascola, and this is
Kristen Lascola.
And make sure you guys stick around to the end, because if you're part of our giveaway, we're going to announce the week 2 winner. If you don't know what we're talking about, go back and watch the last episode, because we celebrated our 100th episode last episode, and we give all the details in that, or you can check in the description below. But we're short on time. We got to get right to it. So what is today's episode all about?
All right. Today is, if you are just starting at a new church, what are the 3 things you should do?
Okay.
So we're going to talk about 3 today. And this is for someone who's probably like an import into a new church.
So you're not a new youth pastor per se. You're just a youth pastor going into a new environment, new church.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess it could fit for either one,
Okay.
but you're starting at a new church. You haven't been homegrown necessarily here, because a lot of what we're going to talk about today is for that person who's like going into a new environment.
Okay.
So number 1, learn the culture. This is so important because we are all one body of Christ. There's a lot of churches, and man, our church is different culture-wise. Now, I would assume you would know some of this before you would even apply to work somewhere to make sure you're a good fit for the culture. But nonetheless, once you're actually there is so much culture and history to learn about the place that you're going. So there's 3 areas you want to learn the culture in. Number 1, the church overall. And I mean, I don't know. It just popped in my head. This could be interdenominational too. So you might want to learn a little bit about that particular denomination if you're hopping denominations. But I'm mostly talking just about the church overall, the church I'm going to.
Yeah.
North Coast Church. What is it all about when you're going in there? And then you want to know the culture of your ministry. So if you're going to be in charge of the junior high ministry, the high school ministry, children's, student ministries overall, what came before you? Like, what is the culture that is currently present in that particular ministry?
Like, has it been a toxic environment over the last several years, or is it a thriving youth ministry that somebody just retired from? Kind of like that, you mean? Like,
yeah, and you're going to have to hear it from multiple perspectives because everyone sees it differently from where they sit. And so we're going to talk more about the nuts and bolts of this in a second, but just wanted to give an overall, like, you got to know the church, you got to know your ministry as it stands, what you're inheriting. And then you need to know the team, because there's going to be a team of people leading the ministry or that have been involved in that ministry, and the team as in terms of like the staff.
Okay.
So who are your paid staff members that you're going to be working alongside that team, and then the team that you yourself are going to be leading. So being a good cultural fit, I mean, that's one of the most important things for longevity in youth ministry and success, like the assimilation. If you don't know the culture, if you don't know what you're getting into, I think you're kind of dead in the water before you even start. So how? That's what we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about. How do we do that? Because I don't think we can just say, learn the culture. Right. All right, number 2, because culture is not, it's made up of subtleties. Yeah. It's made up of perspectives. It's made of what I've noticed is like nuances, like things that you may or may not be able to put into words. And so you need to spend some time, number 1, observing. So, I mean, you're going to get your own perspective and your own handle on the culture just through watching. And how do you do that? Go to as many things as you can right out of the gate. So, I mean, we talk in youth ministry all the time about having boundaries and saying no, and you can't be at everything at all times. Well, just talk to your spouse and realize for a season, I'm going to go to everything. Not forever, but
give a timetable on that. What do you think it'd be like? 3 months, 6 months, 1 year?
I mean, it depends how much is going on and how much you can absorb. I'd say like go to as much as you can for the first, 3 to 6 months.
Okay.
You know, if there was a lot happening, you might only need 3 months because you got to go to a prayer meeting, you got to go to a board meeting, you got to go to a missions thing, you got to go to a family event. Maybe you could fit it all in, but you might need to stretch that out a little bit because you also have a job to do. So you have your own job to do. Plus, I think you should try to be at as many things as possible.
Okay.
What is the church doing event wise? What are some meetings you can sit in on? Are there opportunities for you to just go and observe as much of what's happening in the church as humanly possible? Because that way you can see what happens with the women's ministry on Thursdays and who are these people. And
so should you, as a male youth pastor, should you attend the women's ministry?
You could offer to speak. I'm
just here to observe. I'm just here to observe.
You could offer to speak. They'd
true.
probably love that. Or offer to help. So like, hey, could I like bring the food for you guys on Thursday? I would love to just come and meet people because I don't know anyone, but could I come and bring the women like coffee or I don't know.
Whatever women have at the women's.
Coffee and muffins, casseroles. I don't know. But yeah, offering to help is a way to get in the door. It's not just like, here I am taking notes. I'm a weirdo.
Just standing in the background.
Standing in the back with a clipboard.
Find a good shadow and hug it.
So that first person observation is going to help you out a lot. So get there as much as you can. You want to also try to pick up on the values as you observe. What does this church value? So meaning, what do they value organizationally? And that's more of an insider perspective, like from where you sit as a staff member, like, man, these people really value being on time, or wow, they really value taking notes during meetings, or like little things like that, or they really value everyone's input or whatever it might be. And then you want to pick up on values more in a ministry sense. So what are the values of, like, would it be prayer? Like, I remember when we got our new campus pastor, I could tell our ministry value shift. For every Christian, prayer is a value, but you know how some are emphasized. Like the second you say something, he's like, I'm going to pray for you right now. Right. You know, and it's like, oh, well, that was a culture shift.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or missions. Like sometimes churches are like, what is a cause we can get behind right now?
Right.
And you want to start to pick up on those things so that you can like start swimming in that water. Because the goal for you as a new person is you want to be a part of the culture as quickly as possible, and the right culture. So you need to pick it up because, man, I can't tell you how many times I've seen the rise and fall of, and not even the rise, just the fall and flop of people coming into new organization, new church, new culture, and it's a fail because they might be a good pastor, they might love the Lord, but if they don't fit with that culture, it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
You know, they last about a year, they can fake it and we can fake it, and then it doesn't work. So
let me interject here for a second. What would you say about, like, you want to obviously assimilate to their culture, but at the same time, I feel like you're probably brought on staff to also add to that culture. So when do you start making changes, or at like, because you don't want to just be like, I've completely sacrificed myself and left myself at the door.
right.
So any ideas and, you know,
Yeah,
good stuff
I mean,
bring to the
we could do
table.
another episode on that, and I think we have touched on that before.
You kind of have to gain the trust of the people before you have a voice at the table.
And that again is a subtlety and a nuance. Like, I don't know how long it's going to take you to assimilate to the culture.
Yeah.
But if you feel like, all right, well, and I'm going to keep going about like relationship and stuff like that, but when you feel like you are one of them, you know, you have to change the culture from the inside. So as long as you're an outsider and as long as you're they,
Right.
you know, I think you don't really, we could even go into the subtleties of what types of changes you can
Right.
make right off the bat. So I think this is like just the good start of like, this is how to like onboard yourself in a really good way to position yourself to have a voice at the table eventually,
Right.
you know? And I think that comes with maturity too, of knowing like, well, we'll get into it. Okay. So, let's see. So here's another way. So we talked about observing. to learn the culture, but also asking questions. So you want to be a person who asks really good questions because like, here's an example. I'll give you 3 really great questions to ask when you come on. Number 1, you could ask this to multiple people. Doesn't have to be just to like the senior pastor, but he'd probably know the least actually because his perspective is very senior pastory. But what is the biggest win from this church in the last year? Like what would, from where you sit, ask a variety of people, what do you think the biggest win for this church was in the last year? And then you want to ask, well, what has been the hardest season for your church in the last few years? So I think win needs to be a shorter amount of time and then hardest season, you can give them the last few years because something about hard seasons stick a little more. And so if it was like, oh, we had a really hard season 3 years ago, it's like, well, who cares? It's like, no, the residual shock waves of that could still be lasting. Whereas a win is more like, you know how you remember the bad things people say, but you don't remember the compliments all the time. So I feel like the wins need to be more immediate and the other ones more distant. And then the third great question, where do you see this church going in the future? Or what do you think the current direction of this church is? Where are we going? And I think that's good to ask staff members, key volunteers, congregation members, whoever, just to kind of say, hey, I'm new. I'd love to hear your perspective.
This actually would be great questions to ask in an interview too. Yes,
that would be fantastic, before you even get there. And I think you can kind of like start to create kind of a conglomerate view of like, all right, like, because honestly, people sit in such different spots that their view on the church and what's happening is so different based on their experience. Another great question to ask someone who's been there for a little while is, well, why are you here? Why do you love this church? So for like a congregant, why are you raising your family here? Why are you plugging in here? Why are you serving at this church when you could be serving at
What are you doing
Why
here?
are you here? I'm so confused.
You can't sit with us.
You can sit with us. Or asking a staff member, like, why do you work here when you could work somewhere else? Maybe they're like, this is the only church that would hire me. That's probably what I would say. But like, why are you here? Why do you love it? How long have you been here? And paying attention to the different like time, like this person has been here for a long time, or why does nobody work here for a long time? And maybe try to get to the bottom of that.
Talk to some of those people.
Hopefully
too.
you would know that before you got hired. But
why'd you stop working there?
And then another great question, this is a little more personal for them maybe, is what are some potential landmines that I should avoid as a new person? When we got our new campus pastor, he kept asking me, help me not step in poop. And I'm like, yeah, I can do that, because he realized there's stuff that's gone on for the last few years.
That
I have
you wouldn't
no idea.
know maybe without having been there for the last few years.
Like this person's not good at last minute stuff, so make sure they're really prepared. Or this person
needs like encouragement.
That's their love language.
Right.
So make sure you lavish it on them. And hopefully some type of insider staff member will, after you've kind of earned some trust, will share those things with you. And it's not like in a gossipy way, but just, hey, like, can you help me win as a new person? Like, I don't have any context for anybody. Help me win. Help me not step in poop. And what are some landmines I should avoid? Or like, never joke with this person about their age or something. That was a weird example.
Totally. Ken is really concerned about his age. Don't talk about it.
I love to make fun of people for their age. Specifically.
Look at this guy. He's 95.
Just delete everything you heard in the last 10 seconds.
All your ageist jokes, just kind of hold those back for that first 6 months.
Well, I thought of other things, but all of them seemed like... Anyways, moving on. All right, number 2. All right, so we learned the culture. I showed you how to do that. Observation and questions. Number 2, establish connections. So, you know what? I want to go back real quick, because when I was talking about looking out for the landmines, I have a better example.
Okay.
So buckle up. This one's better. So, for example, at our church, something called life groups are really important to like, that's what we put so much effort towards. Because we're a large church, we want to make it feel small. We want people to have connections. So life groups, small groups, connection groups. Everyone has a different name for them. So if that's really important to the church you're coming into, maybe you join one, right? And P.S., I'm most of the time in one. Right now I'm not, but most of the time I am. So join a life group. Or I don't know if you speak Myers-Briggs language, but I had a guy ask me the other day, he might get a job at our church. He's like, what do I need to know? I said, you seem like a very organized, deadline-oriented person. That's called a J in Myers-Briggs. I said, but we're a very P organization, and P stands for perceiving. It's more of like, you're flexible, you go with the flow, start time and end times are a little more lax. And so I warned him, I'm like, hey, that's could be a cultural difference between you and the organization you might want to look out for. He's like, oh, I've heard that before. That's really good to know. And so those are the things that you want to ask people or try to figure out, like, what is valuable to this organization?
Yeah.
Where might I need to bend a little bit? Like, does my Myers-Briggs and the organizational Myers-Briggs match? Or, you know, because if you're like the kind of person who's like going to get mad at everyone for being late, but that's part of the culture, it's like, oh, well, it starts at 9, but it's going to be like 9:10. Like, that's how ours is, you know? So anyways, okay. See, that was better.
I like the ageist jokes better.
You're old, or you're young. Yeah. Oh, what are you, a baby?
Tim over here is only 9, but don't say anything about it. He's really self-conscious. He does all our accounting.
Conference. I just got back from Nashville. I went to a really good conference, and the lady speaking, she goes, like, I'm about 52, and blah, blah, and she kept talking. She goes, how can you be about 52? I'm 52. Maybe that was a slip and I'm insecure about my age. She's like, I'm 199 pounds and I'm 52. I'm just going to tell you guys everything. I thought that was so funny. See, so people are sensitive about their age. Maybe that's what I was thinking of it. All right. Number 2, establish connections. So just like we were saying, go to as many things as possible so that you can observe. Well, establish as many connections as possible so that you meet. We know it. I mean, we could probably talk about this in every episode of our podcast. Relationship is king when it comes to ministry. You need to know people. You need to know as many people as possible. And I'm going to actually put an extra there and say, like, who are the pillars of this congregation? And I was almost hesitant to say that because I'm like, it almost sounds like who are the cool kids? Like, I want to know them. Who are the popular people? Not necessarily, but kind of going back to what we just talked about. How do you learn culture the fastest from the people who are in the core as much as possible? Who's gone to the church for a long time? Who's that super volunteer who might as well be paid staff? Who is a super influential person in your church that everybody knows and likes? And
could be that person that's like, they're technically not on staff, but we kind of treat them as such.
Yeah, we have people
don't
like that.
Hey, excuse me, you're not supposed to be back here. And then you're all of a sudden the person who's...
Guy, you're bossy. That's why.
Yeah, right? You know what I mean, though? Yeah. It's like, no, that guy, we give him a pass.
Do you know who he is?
Not just one of those cultural subtleties that you wouldn't know, you know?
And that's a good point. And when you get close to those people, you get a like front row seat to the church culture, and you know, they can introduce you to other people, and you start to kind of understand, like, and even when it comes, this is so funny to me, like, what kind of humor are you guys about? You know what I mean? Because there's certain teams I've been a part of and I'm like, whoa, they're super conservative with like joking, and like everyone's a little more prim, and
you're not saying politically affiliated, but just more in like the
like
colorfulness of their joking.
You can just tell they're much like super sugary sweet all the time. And then there's other teams that
a lot of jabbing and ribbing and that stuff.
And so it's good to even be able to like kind of pick up on that stuff too, of like, how do I swim in these waters? Because you don't want to like come across like abrupt or
Right.
something weird. You know what I mean? So it's like absorbing and learning. And so meeting as many people as possible in this church, establishing those connections, because the truth is you're already at a disadvantage being an import rather than homegrown. And that's how we kind of describe people we hire that come up through the ministry. Like, oh, I remember him when he was in junior high and then he was in high school and joined our college group. And then we hired him and now he's our youth pastor. That's a homegrown home team advantage. Mm-hmm. But if you're an import, you're already at a disadvantage, regardless of how great you are. Or, as I'm saying it out loud, sometimes people like think someone from the outside is so much better.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Totally.
So there's like, you could kind of try to figure out that tension, but I feel like you're at a disadvantage, not in terms of like, will people like me, but just you're not part of the tribe yet. And so establishing those relationships, at that conference I was at last week, one of the pastors said, he's like, I've had in the last, I think he said 10 years of ministry, 5,000 coffees with people. He's always either coffee or beer, but I've hung out with people like 5,000 times and just heard their stories and hung out. And that's the kind of pastor he was. And so for you coming into a new team, it's like, well, who could I get coffee with? Who could I invite over? Who could I, spend an afternoon with and just start being relational outside of church? Or where's everyone going? What's everyone doing? And trying to get in those doors socially. So, and then number 3, this is more of like a don't do than a do. But if you're brand new on a church staff, a really great tip is don't compare this church to your previous church.
Yeah. Unless someone specifically says the words, what did you do at your last church? Never say the words.
What was it like?
Right. Never say the words at my last church or my old church.
It's like talking about an ex. And it's always bad for.
Tell me more wonderful things about them.
But see, here's the tension, because it might not be wonderful things. So I feel like you're either way, it's bad form, because number one, if you're talking bad about your ex all the time, there is a part of people that's like, I bet you there's 2 sides to this story.
Was it you and not them?
Exactly. Or
especially if that's an in-town ex or church in this example.
Yeah. So why can't you get along with anyone?
Yeah.
Or it's just like this negative vibe of like, okay, like, wow, like, it sounds really bad, like move on, And so unless you're asked directly, and even then, if you have like a super traumatic, painful experience, I don't know, I would say in the beginning, hold those cards a little close. And then as you get to know them, and if they continue to ask more questions as you go or whatever, then there could be an appropriate time to share it. But I feel like right off the bat, just like throwing that church under the bus usually comes across the wrong way. On the other hand, if you just miss that church so much and they were better and they were bigger and they were, why aren't you still there? And it comes across like pretentious. It always leaves a bad taste in people's mouth. Like, well, at my old church, like it was huge. And so like the way we did things, like you might not even be meaning to say they were better, but like, well, our budget like was big, so we could do things, but we could adjust it here. Like you just have to be careful of like comparing this.
Sometimes just leaving out the whole part about at my old church. Let's say they did parking really well. Instead of saying, well, at my old church, what we did for parking, just say one thing that works well for parking is da 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 da, and then it's like, oh, that's a great idea. Like, we should do that, instead of it being like, oh, your old church.
Right. And I think it just magnifies the fact that you're not one of us.
Yeah.
And if they, like we said, if they ask, fine. If they don't, that's probably a signal that they don't care. And if they don't care, that's actually okay, because you're not there anymore. So why live in the past on that? Like, if they don't care, they don't care. They won't ask. And I don't think you need to go out of your way to bring it up if for all the reasons we said. So just realize your number one priority is, I want to be one of you.
Yeah.
And now I bear this name and I'm going to invest here. I want to observe. I want to learn your culture. I want to ask questions. I want to meet people. I want to become one of you. I want to serve where I can. And then when and if changes need to happen, and that's another episode, that you will be changing the culture from the inside. And I think there's a pride level too of like, don't assume like, all right, guys, new kid in town. I know how to do this. You can learn from me. You need to posture yourself to learn from them. It's like, before you do anything, learn from the people that are already there. Respect the history. Respect what's happening, whether it's healthy or unhealthy. Still respect what's going on, because even in an unhealthy environment, there's still things you can learn. There's still things that are going well. And there's things that can be redeemed and changed later on. But your number one priority is to change it from the inside, you're not a consultant. And if you are, this is not the podcast where you go listen to a consulting podcast. But a consultant changes things from the outside and makes observations. But you've signed up to be a part of this family. So I think you need to see yourself as an insider first, a family first, and then let's change this thing together if needed. But don't be change eager, you know, be people eager.
Definitely not in the beginning.
Yeah, it's about people first. So be very people eager. Change eager is definitely secondary or thirdary or fourthary.
Another thing I'd like to add to your initial point about the culture of the church is extending that not just to the church, but actually the area and the town, whatever around that, especially if you're coming from outside of that. We had somebody a long time ago before I or you were even at the current church we're at, who came from I guess you would, at least culturally around here, it would be considered a bigger town. And Fallbrook, where we are at, is considered somewhat agricultural and rural in Southern California terms. It's like 75,000 people, but
that's what I guessed the other day. Someone asked me, I'm like, I don't know,
it's like right around that.
People.
So the person, this youth pastor who was hired on, when being introduced, made the statement somewhat to the effect of, cow folk, farm town, things like that, and was like kind of saying like, kind of like a cut down, like I wasn't sure if I wanted to come here because it's such like a farm town or whatever. Well, the people in our town take big pride in that.
Yeah.
And that rubbed people wrong for the entire time he was there, to the point where it was like 10 years later, I still heard people talk about how that guy had said that.
Ooh, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think, like it's easy to make fun of like a different part of the country or
the way they talk, the way they act or whatever. Don't say it.
Yeah. I mean, you might get to the point.
Earn that trust.
Like a couple of years down the line where you can like Christine Kane made fun of all of us this weekend at that conference. She goes, can you guys say awesome? And the congregation or all the participants were like, awesome. She's like, oh, that sounded so good. Now say awesome. And we're all like, awesome, like how we say it. And she's like, well, at least he sounded dignified for a second. I can't do an Australian accent.
Oh, I didn't know it was Australian.
But I'm like, you're Christine Kane. Make fun of me more.
Right, you can get away with that.
Hilarious. But most of the time when somebody comes on staff, you're like, whoa.
Right.
Like earning the right to do that. So I'm so glad you brought that up, because if they were still talking about it 10 years later, like, wow.
Like they grew to like that person, but talk about getting off on the wrong foot. I don't even know who you're
talking about.
I'll tell you later.
Tell me. Whisper it in my ear. All right.
So, hey, we got to get to our giveaway. We're not doing no comment of the day, no question of the day. It's all about the giveaway. Hey, I'll eat some. Hey, no, same word. All right. So this week we're giving away Throw Burrito.
I love
a fun
this
game that I haven't played, but I've heard
it's so fun.
And the winner for this week's Throw Burrito set is Doll Ibarra. Congratulations, Doll. Thank you so much for entering, and please enjoy your set of Throw Burrito. If you already have one, now you have a backup set. Give
it to me, because I don't have one.
If you guys are interested in entering our giveaway, see the description below. And we hope that you will enter it before it is all over. We're still doing the grand prize giveaway in another week and 1 day. So you still have time. So the grand prize is a Powder War set from Chameleon Colors And
Did I already sing the Chameleon song last time?
You did.
Ah,
Yeah.
I was
and we didn't get flagged for it, so that's good. Your singing is so off. And also a dodgeball set from Rhino Skins. 6-inch dodgeball set. They're amazing. You can hit people in the face and it doesn't really hurt that bad. The dogs are barking in the background, so we need to wrap things up. They're getting restless. So thank you guys so much for watching and listening. And also next week's giveaway is for a Can Jam set. So make sure you guys enter before then. Thanks again. We will see you guys next time.